example of the difference between fungible and non-fungible would be if you're standing there with two other people and you all drop it to $20 on the floor. It doesn't matter which $20 you pick up because they're all going to get you the same amount. Each one of them is interchangeable with one another. Let's say you were standing there and you dropped a birth certificate on the floor with two other people. It would matter which one you picked up because each one is unique and representative of something. So that's kind of what a non-fungible token is. A token is on top of blockchain. And today we're going to explore how these are used, how to approach them from an asset standpoint, we're going to try to touch on aspects of if you're a builder, how you would approach this from that aspect, and also if you're an artist, how these NFTs and art kind of combine. And so joining us today, we have Marguerite from Blockade Games. We have Alex Salnikov from Rarible. We have Franky Nines, artist and mobile developer based out of Nevada, and Johnvan Hartmann, coming to us from Austria today. So why don't we just quickly go around and give a quick intro of who you are and why NFTs? What brought you to this space and why are you a fan of them?
Okay, no one start. I'll start. Okay. How do all the ways lead to NFTs? For me, it's basically, let's say this way. I'm in the creative industry since 20 years. I came across blockchain 2014, and it was interesting from a perspective. You can send things from A to B. How did I end up in NFTs? The whole blockchain space was normally full of traders and tech guys, but there was no place for creative guys, let's say it this way. And for me, if you're in the art world or if you're a creative person, I was always thinking, okay, we are in a digital world where we can put videos online, everything online, but you still cannot capture the value. If you were doing like net art or something like this 10 years ago, the biggest challenge was always how to sell it. And, like NFTs, the concept for me came across like more than like 2 years ago. But it was at the stage where, as a non-technical person, it's hard for you to use them. And I thinking, so most like 10 months ago, it was able easily to mint. And like platforms like Rarible nowadays, there's a whole ecosystem around it. Because before it was like you were minting NFTs out of fun, let's say it this way, but there was no ecosystem around it. That's basically how I ended up in NFTs.
Oh, nice. Okay, what about you, Alex?
Right. So I have been working in the blockchain space since 2012. Basically, that's I got quite early. I bought my first Bitcoin by $60. Yeah, and it was on the night Silk Road went down, Russell Bit cut. So I just ran to the kiosk, put some cash in it and bought my Bitcoin, and I felt the feeling of that I truly own something that it's mathematically mine, and basically I've then done a lot of things, but last year I discovered NFTs. I was doing what to do new in blockchain, something cool, and I had the same feeling basically when I got one. I then got to some minting platform and mint something and bought my team member basically and sold it to my team member, and he sold it to another team member, and we kind of played it for a day, and it was an aha moment. Yeah, we decided that we need to do something with it. That's how Rarible was born. We didn't want to bind to any specific use case of it just because we expected it to be broad and growing and proliferating. That's why it's marketplace basically and an issuance platform. So we are like increasing the adoption of NFTs and increasing the liquidity of the marketplace at the same time.
Oh, very nice. Marguerite, how about you?
Similar to some of the other folks, I was a fine artist and creative in the space back in 2013, 2014. So my basically how I came to learn about Bitcoin, I did it through a creative lens. And that led to creating crypto puzzles, which was hiding private keys into physical art pieces and then digital mediums, and basically creating treasure hunts in which the winners would receive the prize. And a lot of times it started with Bitcoin and then it became other digital currencies. But what I found along the way was there's so much potential with blockchain as a medium as far as enabling creatives. And so in 2018, we founded Blockade Games, which is the game studio. And we're building right now Neon District, which is a cyberpunk RPG. And the whole prospect of that is that instead of running through a treasure hunt and only getting a couple of people grabbing the prize at the end, that with non-fungible tokens, they are able to collect metadata, essentially, attributes along the way, and which is different than a fungible token. They don't have that capability. So anyways, you can go walk through these different experiences and then at the end have something valuable just because of how you interacted with it. So for me, that was really neat because of the other experiences I had done prior. And now I feel like the non-fungible space and the creative space around it is exploding. So there's a million different pathways right now that we could all pursue. But anyways, as far as Neon District goes, we are rolling out different milestones along the rest of this year that are really exciting, including character crafting. So you take 5 different tokens, and you can compose them into one cyberpunk character, and that character will be playable in a PvP experience. So yeah, I guess that's the high level on me.
That's nice. Thank you. How about Franky? How about you?
Yeah, cool. So let's see, I've been in the gaming industry, gaming and entertainment since 2006, Bay Area. I've worked on Facebook games, mobile games. I worked at Zynga, and I came into the NFT space around 2017. I was in London working for a data privacy company, and I saw CryptoKitties. And as soon as I saw it, it clicked. I knew exactly what it was. And so I went straight to the source, and I worked for Dapper Labs for about 1.5 years. And now I'm in the space, just kind of still navigating the art world. I've worked on a lot of technology, a lot of futuristic sticker products for big brands, a lot of brand IP. Did projects for Snoop Dogg, Major Lazer, Diplo. With Dapper Labs, I worked on Cheese Wizards, NBA Top Shot, and some of the new stuff that's coming out. So yeah, I've been in the space kind of growth hacking and breaking Instagram and Twitter for several years now. So
awesome. So I think that we all see the potential in NFTs, and I'm glad that we have such a diverse panel because it really allows us to kind of get an understanding from different perspectives on the same topic, though. And so with that, I'm curious to know when approaching NFTs from the space that you have, what were some of the most important design decisions in developing or using NFTs you had to make? Marguerite, why don't you lead this one off?
So I guess early on we saw I did something with this called token controlled access for one of the Bitcoin challenges I had done previously. And what we found was that it created too much of a bottleneck, I guess, to keep the users that we had. So the first Bitcoin puzzles were so viral. They were just very, very viral. When we introduced these new challenges, like, for example, you have to send a little bit of Bitcoin dust to an address in order for this bot to identify your address and send you tokens as you play the game, which unlocks levels as you play. What we found was the drop-off was just gigantic. I mean, it was more than 90% of the players that had played previously. So in the same way, we look at blockchain and the requirements of downloading a Web3 wallet, just all these steps that you push a mainstream consumer through. Similarly, your drop-off is massive. So what we've really focused on is how do you obscure the blockchain and how do you hide it so that just a regular person can walk in, play the game without having to go and buy blockchain assets, game assets first in order to play the game, because no one wants to do that. You don't even know what you're buying at that point, right? You want to be able just to open the game, just like in Fortnite, drop in, you're playing for free, and then they get you later with like, oh, I want to look cool too. So you need that natural progression, and we're getting there with the blockchain and the layer 2 and then the middleware development we've all been working on. It's been about a 2-year progress for us right now, but I think we're actually really getting to a place where we're going to be able to hand these assets into mainstream consumers' hands and them to play, and then realize it's a blockchain asset.
I see. All right, and Johnvan, how about you?
Basically, for me, if you're trying to sell digital artworks, I think it's the easiest way and the only way to do it. Because, for example, this idea of how to publish something in a digital way, it's a picture in most of the cases. And for me, it was like, okay, like, to be honest, like if you look at all the art stuff in the NFT space, I find it too simple, if I'm honest, because I'm thinking you're in a digital space, so you should really use the whole thing as a full potential. And I think what we are seeing at the moment is 3 different streams in the art world. So first of all, what we all consider as crypto art, and if you're like a hardliner, you would say crypto art has to do something with cryptocurrency or like the cypherpunk movement. Then what we are seeing, like digital artists, which are net artists, people who were publishing things in a digital form, they are using it as a form of tokenization. And then also which is what I find the most interesting space is, this combination of real artists, they are issuing also to the artworks in a digital way. Like, like for example, if you think about limited prints, they're easy to fake, for example. But imagine you're buying a limited print run, but in combination with a digital NFT. So basically, I always think about the concept of a twin concept. So, and then the question also arrives basically where the value is generated. And for me, like from a conceptual thing, like NFTs are in this way how it's used. For example, it's Rarible as a small, the first step. For me, what was the most interesting thing was, I don't know if you guys know about crypto stamps. Crypto stamps is kind of a real stamp which was issued by the Austrian post office, and they basically distributed it globally. And they sold, like, technically it's the largest distribution of NFTs. And what I was finding the interesting, the NFT was implemented in this product very simply, but people who are not familiar with blockchain could even participate. And this is what I'm seeing on these art platforms as well. So people who are not really familiar with blockchain per se, but they're familiar with art, they are using it. And that's for me something like, because we're always talking about what are the use cases for blockchain. I think that NFTs is basically that use case which could lead to a patch of a larger amount of adoption. And like, it's very same, like the 2 things where I think in this whole industry moves forward is exactly like the people involved. I think at the panel, it's something in the creative industry, and particularly at the moment, what we're seeing, it's the arts industry plus as well the gaming industry.
I see. UX is definitely an issue, but I think you had a good point too in terms of designing for the NFTs and how they're kind of distributed. Franky, do you want to chime in here on how when you're visually designing, how that kind of correlates with the NFT? And is that something that you look at as a part of the medium, or do you see that as just on the distribution side?
I think the big thing when designing is you have to, there's a couple different cases, right? There's the NFT that doesn't change state, and then there's the NFT that has the potential to change state. And that state change is really slow. So when you're designing, especially with games, you have to keep in mind that, like, what you're selling the user, right? Depending on how they're going to be using that object, they might, it might go through some iterations, it might go through an evolution, it might go through some kind of change, and that's usually going to take 20 minutes, right? It's going to take 5 minutes to write to the chain. It's going to take, $2. It's going to take $6. So you have to kind of think a little bit slower, right? Like, versus in games currently where, your character can change and manipulate a lot quicker, evolve a lot quicker. It's essentially written. So I think the way that you design them, the way that you approach those things, is you have to kind of keep that in mind. Also, I think what metaphors work really well is like the concept of attachment, right? Where, like, my NFT can now hold something, or it can now wear something, and that object that it's wearing, that attachment, is also an NFT, right? It's the education of that. So using metaphors, I think, is important when designing. Now, the big thing for me is it depends on the use case, right? Is this something that I'm just looking at and potentially just slapping on a wall in crypto voxels, or is this something that I'm like, trying to nurture and evolve to then build more traits so that I can sell for a higher value? Or is this something that I'm just holding on because I just want it for myself, right? Like, what is the actual use case of the object in this, I think those are all the questions that I kind of look at when I'm designing something.
That's great. Good insight too, like in the criteria and kind of some of the constraints and use cases you have to plan for. Marguerite, I know that you're building this gaming environment. So how about from your perspective, how does the NFT and the visual component work within the mechanics of what you're developing?
So with my background in fine art, I'm really passionate about the art aspect as well. And also, I mean, you see the art markets that are taking off right now just on just being digital art assets, not even having utility. So by combining the two and allowing for example, when you design in Neon District, these characters, they're actual rigs that you animate, but they're broken out into different canvases essentially that can be painted differently. So they're already built and designed for third-party development and other artists to come in and make their own types of skins. But internally, in-house, our artists are amazing. So visually, if you've seen Neon District, it really does stand out in the painterly, it's 2D, super painterly, very dramatic in the cyberpunk aesthetic. And I mean, I think that the assets just as art are special. So we've really tried to focus on that as well.
Very nice. So Alex, how does this play into the Rarible paradigm?
Right. So one of the particularly important design aspects of the platform is emotional aspect. So that at first we wanted to keep things simple. So it was specifically as simple as possible. Like we just draw a design of the first prototype like on the table, and it was like image, name, description, price, done. It's sold. Well, I mean, for the user, it works slick. You just click a couple of buttons and it's there. And we added 3 boxes to have a visual avatars of artists. We added nicks. We added like usual Web 2.0 features that people love. We added covers to their pages. And the blockchain takes like 10% of the whole system, but still it works. It's interoperable. You can go to OpenSea. You can sell the item there. So basically, what we were trying to do is to make the best UX possible to simplify the actions with NFT. What you can do with NFT, and that's the whole space is about bringing new users who aren't necessarily crypto native to use simple things to discover the great potential of blockchain.
Very nice. And so, so when it comes to this, from a building standpoint, and even from an artistic aspect, when you came down to actually either designing the smart contracts and the architecture, do you plan for like upgradability, or what does that architecture look like? And then from a more of a visual standpoint, was there any kind of selection, in terms of what protocol or standards that you used to inform or to support what you wanted to design? So Franky, why don't you start us off with this one?
I think you always want to design for scalability. I mean, you can look at the evolution of what the protocol has already done so far. First, it was very basic, right? Like it was like a single contract, and then it's like now we have collections of contracts, and then we have like collections of NFTs, and so I think you always kind of want to leave room for it to scale. It's at its core, it's about architecting smart. Right. So if you know that your base foundation object is going to be some kind of image that has a couple of traits, then you want that to be your starting point, and you want to abstract out multiple layers from there to make it scalable. Obviously, since things, since the way the blockchain functions and smart contracts function, if you set some golden rules that you can't go back on, you might not be able to go back on. So you're kind of set in stone in that sense. So you always got to kind of, I think like that's what makes blockchain developers very, very unique from the development community, is the fact that they can think in that way. They can think of the way that, like, if they write code a certain way, or if they write the properties a certain way, that they might be stuck that way, you know? We've obviously seen that in hacks that have happened in the blockchain, like, you know, where people have drained wallets on accident. It's like, maybe you shouldn't have had that rule there.
Yeah, upgradability is key. Johnvan, what do you have to say about that?
I mean, if you, let's say this way, from an artist perspective, if you are issuing NFTs, it's still, you know, it's completely non-technical. As I said, in the most cases, on the most platforms, it's just you uploading an image. It can be animated, it can be a video. What I'm thinking, what is at the moment missing, like from a technical perspective, with NFTs is, you know, I can hold an NFT myself, but I cannot rent it out to you, for example, Thomas. So it's basically something like properties, or maybe an adoption in the standard, that I can rent out, for example, my NFT to someone else. Because imagine you are having a lot of game items, and you maybe don't want to sell it, you just want to borrow it to someone. So I think there still will come some, how to say that, features which need to be implemented in the protocol. When it's about technology, like from a creative perspective, what I'm seeing at the moment is like, I myself got deeply involved recently in something like, you know, like Oculus Quest, where you can create three-dimensional virtual worlds with painting, and like making paintings experienceable. And the only question is like, okay, how can you put that into an NFT? I mean, at Rarible, it's possible, because what you can do is they have something like I don't know if it's the right word, a lockbox. So they are selling NFTs, and the person which is buying the NFT, they can unlock it, and then, for example, you can provide them a source file they can download. And things like this, I think they're very interesting. But the question for me is as well, like in the games industry, like I myself involved in crypto voxels as well. And there the point is, imagine you own an asset in crypto voxels. How can I use it in Decentraland? How can I use it in a game? Or like even like what I would like to find interesting to see, NFTs which have kind of how to say that, a lifetime. You know, for example, you can only use them like 100 hours and then they're gone. So like I think what we're seeing at the moment is still at the beginning, and what Franky was saying, you need to think blockchain. I think that's just a state which we're in now. So from a creative perspective, you should not limit yourself, because maybe in 12 months from now on, transactions are running like in half a second. You know what I mean? So like things are changing continuously. It's like a little bit, you know, like YouTube's video streaming. Before YouTube, people were sending around videos on email, and then came YouTube, and then came Twitch, and now, for example, everyone is hanging out in VR chat. So you see like evolution of stuffs. And I think in the NFT space per se, we are at a very early stage. And you just can do basic functionalities, but as we see more and more use cases, and I think as well what Rarible is doing, or like what Franky was saying, those projects like NBA Shooters, I think it was called, or also like the Garbage Kids one, there are NFTs are basically just used, you know, if you nowadays build a service, you're not saying I'm building it on Docker and using AWS. And I want to have that actually with NFTs. NFTs are just used in the back, and customers don't really need to take care about
it. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's the technology that enables it, I think will kind of fall more into the background of things. So Alex, you know, from a smart contract architecture standpoint, you know, how is Rarible kind of configured in that way, or you know, what informed your choices of what protocols to use?
Well, basically, there's not much to choose right now in the NFT space. So Everything works on Ethereum. The most popular standard is ERC 721. Yeah, we also have support of 1155. That is multiple. But again, we abstract this away. We just tell our users that it's single or multiple. I've been exploring some other contracts like ERC 998 or 988. I don't remember that.
Yeah, the engine one.
Yeah, and that is composable NFTs, so that like NFT can hold another NFT. But I'd say it's rather dead right now. I haven't been looking into the actual use of it. If there is a lot, like tell me. And in terms of the general smart contracts design, it's going to be quite a lot for us since we just launched the token and we will have a governance of the platform, and eventually we want to have this completely on chain, and there is so much decisions that need to be made, like voting in a DAO. It costs gas to vote. People are like in the DeFi space. People are familiar with the matter. They vote a lot. They participate a lot, and we kind of have another standpoint here, just because most of our users right now are artists. Although I look how they evolve quickly in terms of financial properties. So and that probably means that we will have to have a liquid democracy, and of course we will have upgradable contracts, but it's kind of a lot to do. We are trying hard, and at some point it will be.
Yeah, I think Alex mentioned it very well. Like there's this big discussion in the NFT art space. So where do you store the files? Do you store it on IPFS? Do you store it on AWS? So there's, like, as you said, because it's blockchain, if you make once a decision, it's done. You can't change it anymore.
Well, I do believe in changes.
Yeah, like for example, on OpenSea, if you mint NFTs, you can always change the image because they don't store the image.
Wow. I think we will have something to say about it, but personally, I prefer some kind of freedom and mutability in that term, just because so much decisions are need to be made. You have to check them before you seal them.
Yeah.
Marguerite, I'm sure you have something to say about this. So from a smart contract architecture standpoint and protocol standpoint, and even some of the things mentioned now, like related to how are you storing the actual assets and correlating them to the NFTs.
Yeah, actually, I have eventually some questions for Alex that I'm really curious about. You're like number one right now in trading volume of the Rarible. So I'm really curious, do you think this is sustainable? Or do you think it's right now just the hype around like the launch?
It's a really great question. The actual number is that nobody knows. So basically, from the mathematical point of view, this is a positive feedback loop. So we incentivize people to trade on the platform, and that means the platform is more popular. That means more people are coming to the platform. That means maybe token somehow appreciate. That means even more people coming to the platform, and it can't go like that forever. So it has to converge to some more stable state, and that's why nobody knows like when that will happen. My bet is that you can incentivize users for quite a long term. So maybe like a year will work definitely, and yeah, but in general, it's just another business model, and a lot of other projects will eventually adopt it. So there will be more stable state, but the whole life is about local unstableness, and we have to pursue for it.
Just, thank you. And circle back to the question about smart contracts. So with Neon District, we designed in for a lot of flexibility so that we can have the metadata that's mutable, essentially. In regards to the art being on IPFS, we designed some protocols for that as well. Except, so I guess the thing that I think is important about that is if someone owns the asset, do they own the IP of the asset? Are they allowed to own the art and do something with it? And if that art asset is not attached to the asset in any sort of meaningful way, then like you have to have accessibility to that. As far as in thinking long term, I think it's okay to have short term solutions though. Like right now, we're all just trying to get to market as fast as possible in multiple different ways and to prove out the value proposition essentially. And then the downside of having a flexible smart contract though is that it is very expensive. So because of that, now you have to think about, okay, well, this is not going to happen on mainnet Ethereum because no user in their right mind is going to play that game. So then now we're thinking about, you have the game application that makes its updates to the smart contract or to the asset at times when it matters. You have to identify when those times are, and then also think about the gameability of that. So you're going to have people trying to break what you're designing as well and look for the, to cheat. So yeah, so anyways, we've had all of that in mind for the past couple of years, and I think with the layer 2 where we are, we're launching on Matic Network, which is the layer 2, and for now, that's going to work for us. It's going to be cheap enough. We've got our different, I guess, the places in which we're on-chain and off-chain set up, so it should be pretty seamless.
Very nice. All right, so now getting down to how we value assets, right? And so from an art perspective, from an in-game asset perspective, Johnvan, do you want to lead us off and how you think people will establish a value for these assets?
I think, there are two different points of it, and I would like to start with one. So how much is worth a digital land in crypto voxels? Because that community, like, let's say 16 months ago, it was worth nothing because no one was there and no one was interested. A year forward, an average partial sells for 3 Ether, which is around $700 US, and explain someone you're paying for virtual land where no one, so there are not millions of users, you're paying something like $700 US. Is that ridiculous or not? The question is, for me, for example, in crypto voxels, why I find it interesting, those people which are in there, they are very, how to say that? I find most of them very intelligent and smart, and they are. It's a certain. I always call it. It's a little bit of an elite community somehow, because you don't actually want to make it cheaper, because that also allows everyone to come in somehow. So there's this problem between mass adoption and control. How to perceive value in art? I mean, art is always for whatever you can sell it, for whatever the market says to you. So, never ask a question what the value is of an artwork. It's like in a modern world, it has definitely to do with something like attention, because, we're living in an economy where everything is rewarded based on the attention you're having. So let's say, for me, what I would like to see is, from an artist's perspective, assumingly someone like Damien Hirst, I don't know, I think most likely everyone knows him, would start to issue NFTs on Rarible and would charge, let's say, $50,000 US for a digital release he's doing. How would that affect the whole industry? These are things what I find interesting. And in game items, I think it's, like digital items have always different perspectives. So first of all, they have a value for a certain amount of community. Because for me, for example, baseball cards or like the garbage kits, to be honest, I would not pay 1 cent for it, because I have no affinity to it. I grew up in Europe, so for me that has no meaning. There's no history. There's no community around it, or nothing like this. For me, for example, that's like, like how do you price something? Is the market prices it for you? It's like similar to tokens. How do you price a token? The market defines what the price is. If you talk about game assets, I think it depends in terms of the parameters. Like in games, it's about how rare is an item, or how limited is an item. And I think from a digital artist's perspective, what you need to take care of is about how do you release? Like, do you release your whole body of work at once? Do you release it as one only? Do you release it as micro editions, or do you release it as an edition of 250 or 1000? And I don't know if you guys know, there's something which is called sedition art, which is issuing digital arts like very similar to what we do like with Rarible, for example, or on all the other platforms, but it's a centralized thing. And what they are doing there is like, I call it always is an expensive sticker album, because you know they're issuing, let's say, like from course a limited edition of 1000, but that's not really interesting for me. And what I was thinking, like what we're seeing in this NFT space is like certain communities generates their own market. And yes, I mean, we all know there are also two pumps happening in NFTs, and particularly we all know there are whales in the market which are basically buying up large amounts of land, large amounts of garbage kits, and reselling them. But that's happening in the real world as well. You know, if you, like, I live normally in Hong Kong, if there's a property developer selling a big one, how to say that, a big property development, he's also selling it to a wholesaler, which is redistributing it then. So I think for me, how do you value an NFT? An NFT has a value what it is worth in terms of usability, but also to, like in the art, it's just worth what an art what the market is wants to pay for it, to be honest.
Thank you. So Alex, I'm curious from your perspective in terms of the pricing and selling mechanics, right? Is, you know, what is your perspective and what you're seeing in terms of price and valuation?
There is a nice book about that has an interesting thought on that. Basically, it's an Albert Barabashi, and it's called The Formula. The question they ask is like, how much does a bottle of wine cost? And basically, the general discussion around all of it is just if the performance. So like the price is a performance, the price is a quality in general, and the price reflects the value of an item. But if the value cannot be measured, if the performance of this item cannot be measured, then basically they postulate that network drives success in that point. So basically, the NFT costs as much as the network of the people who wants it, as the network of the people who you know too, and basically, yeah. So the general like interaction on the market matters. That's what matters.
Yeah.
Okay. So Marguerite, how about from your perspective in establishing at least a base value, or are you looking at assets and letting the market determine the price from an auction standpoint?
So for the game assets for Neon District, actually we have a totally different model than what you see today. So today it's catering to the block, like the whales of the cryptocurrency space, in which you are basically buying power, and there's a limited number, and you buy this one because it's going to be more powerful. But from a game design standpoint, that's game breaking. And not fun for new users. If you want to grow your game and your audience, you need it to be fun out of the gate for everybody, and then to find ways in which they are incentivized to continue. So the way that we've designed is that the assets, initially, the art will make them special and valuable, so you could buy special art, similar in the way that you could with Fortnite, for example. It's season-based, but then it's how you play with them that, just like any RPG, you have a specialization tree. So as you make choices for your character or assets, they become more specialized. So what that means is maybe you start out with like a hammer, but eventually it becomes very tool specific in how you would play. So your deck becomes very specific, and that means it's we are designing very wide as opposed to vertical.
Okay. And Franky, how about you? How does valuation and price kind of determine in what you do?
Well, we touched on a couple of things. I think there's a couple of points that I look at. One is obviously rarity, which we touched on. How shiny it is, what the market is willing to kind of pump, right? And I think the one thing that no one really touched on yet is an item in a collection that completes something. where people are striving to get, all the purple things or all the, all the green things. And if there's a very limited supply of that, it's the completed collection, right? So I think in the collection space where people are trying to have one work of every art, or one work from a specific artist, they want one edition, or even in the print space in fine art, where a lower edition number is a more valued number, or an artist print, it's a different valuation than number 50 of 50. So I think I think the big thing too is definitely, I would say, what people kind of want to pump, right? I think that's something that's very apparent in the space, that what we saw with Dogecoin on TikTok, it's just like a bunch of people just driving hype to move the numbers up. So I think there's a lot of hype that drives the value. I think it's obviously rarity. I think it's collection, and then obviously how shiny it is. Unfortunately, it's not about how much it costs to move, which is very interesting. And I think that's something that separates the asset, right? Like, you don't carry around 15 pounds of gold because you don't want to carry around 15 pounds of metal, right? So like, why doesn't an object on the blockchain that costs, I don't know, say hypothetically $40 to transfer, why isn't that thing cost, millions of dollars? Like, it's not determined by the weight, I guess. It's not determined by, what the actual data sum, I guess, in that sense. It's how shiny it is.
Right. Yeah, the hard costs associated with transference and maybe even creating it. Okay, so with this, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on. Actually, so Alex, did you touch on this pricing?
On which?
You did. The valuation? Sorry, I just want to make sure I didn't skip you. Okay, so let's talk about like on-chain versus off-chain data. So how is metadata used, and how does it kind of play into the mechanics of the asset? Alex, why don't you kick us off?
Right. So the big debate over this was always like, if it's centralized or decentralized. If it is an IPFS, then what's going on with the IPFS nodes and that kind of stuff. What I believe is the case here is just people want to know that if the company is dead, if the company moves out, if the company does whatever it wants to do, then will I still have my NFTs? And I believe the answer for today is yes, just because the company will probably, even if it stores it centralizedly, in a centralized manner, it will store it for long enough until the decentralized solutions are here. I spoke today or yesterday with Arviv, the PermaWeb storage software. They're doing great, and I believe there is no such a problem, basically. It will be solved in 3 years. Until that, it can be stored on IPFS. Maybe we do want to have some publicity on like who runs the nodes, like where else this file is attached, but not a big deal right now. Just we can ignore this.
Okay. Marguerite, so from your perspective, how does the metadata and how do you choose what is on-chain versus stored in metadata?
Yeah, I think, so for us, it's the consideration of user experience. So where can we make the user experience better? Then maybe that doesn't need to be on chain, but does it take away from the user sovereignty, like Alex was talking about a little bit? Then we usually lean towards they have the ability at any point to have all the blockchain features that they would expect without losing any of the benefits of the gaming experience. So, for example, like you can go through a whole battle and you won't have lag during the battle. You're not getting constant pushes to the chain, at that point. But there are critical moments in which the status of an asset has to be registered in order to make it, to be using the blockchain for the fact that you're making a ledger of this asset's experiences. So when does that occur? And when can it occur in a way that it doesn't take away from user experience?
Okay. Johnvan, what do you think about on-chain versus off-chain data?
I think I'm very similar opinion like Alex. So at the moment it's solvable. It's not as important, and as I said before, I still think it's in the early days. So we will come up with a solution. I think where it's definitely a question at the moment is in the gaming industry, because as it was mentioned as well, it needs to move fast, and you cannot write everything in a chain. So sometimes what I'm also like, I'm a big believer in decentralization, but decentralization is also like a utopia, which most likely we will never reach. It's basically like, let's have peace on the whole earth and everyone is equal. It's also just a very idealistic approach. But I'm thinking decentralization makes sense where it makes sense, and going the centralized way is like sometimes out of convenience you need to do that. And so I'm okay with that, because it's a technical limitation. If technically it's no difference, then I would personally prefer decentralization. But as long as I have a choose, I can choose, it's fine.
Okay. Franky, does on-chain, off-chain data play into your world?
It's all about speed, honestly. Like how fast can you, not only how fast can you build it, but how fast is it going to make to get it to work. Like the reason why we have centralized like image hosting is because like uploading a 16 megabyte photo on chain is just not make sense. Where you have, like in CryptoKitties case, where you have attributes that are hash numbers for the hex values, like that makes sense. But I've worked on probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 blockchain projects, and we've always at a point, whether in a hackathon or at a big company, have been like, okay, can we just do this centralized, because like we don't have 3 more months to work on this. Like it's speed, right? Like speed, cost, efficiency. I think people were centralized works. That's a fact. So if you can save time by taking a shortcut, most companies will do that because you have funding. You're going to run out of money. You're going to have to lay off all your employees. Like that's a fact.
So I'm curious to know what you guys think about hyperutility. So this would be like the notion of having a particular asset. And so we'll use an example for an avatar within a game. So let's say that you could have mechanics where if I go to a particular brand's pop-up and I either have an asset or I can get an asset from them, and then I do some other kind of activity. By doing that activity, it can enhance the mechanic of the actual asset, right? So let's say that I have a soccer player and I actually go to a game where the soccer player is physically there. And so because I have the asset and he's there, now all of a sudden, let's say I can put when I go back home, I can put the asset back into a game and now he has new moves, right? So this is an example of hyperutility, how the same asset could be used to bridge industries or across platforms. So Marguerite, do you have any thoughts on this notion?
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, you don't even have to do that transfer function because the assets can live simultaneously on multiple different chains. What happens is they get locked up on the ones they're not being actively engaged in. And then when you want to go out to the other chain, that's when they get updated elsewhere. So you don't actually have to like leave them out of your wallet, essentially, whatever is your main wallet. They can, so for example, you can have multiple different layer 2 experiences using your asset and your wallet, they never leave your wallet. So I think though we're all working on that functionality, and right now it's a very niche use case. We've at Blockade done this with one sword. In Neon District, it's a blade, and then in Battle Racers, it's a car part, and then in Lightbrush Trails, it's a hologram on a ship. So if you have this asset in your wallet, you have this experience in altered games. But as you can see, like the collaboration it requires is still pretty large. So I don't know that we're going to see that growth happen really anytime soon. You're going to see experimental or one-off, maybe like rarity, like things that are like a celebrity asset, something that is you can loan and then it can enter different worlds as a celebrity. I could see game devs being more interested in that sort of like publicity as opposed to just building a ton of infrastructure to have lots of interoperable assets right out of the gate.
I see. Johnvan, any thoughts on hyperutility?
So I find that personally very interesting, and I think like it's definitely the easiest way to do it in the beginning in a fully virtual environment. Let's say this way, and example is like I think MBL, as the baseball league, they issued NFTs and they issued their own app, and it would definitely be cool, you know, if you go into a game of the team you are collecting as well, and you know, the app basically knows where you are because everything is tracked, that you get some additional features or bonus points. I think that things are more like how to say that, like if it's the own app, it should be easy to do because you just need to track, for example, geolocation. If it's something, let's say that I need to transfer it either in another app or another chain, it's basically, do you get the collaborations going on? And you know, particular if you're talking about like more like IP properties, like football players. Imagine you would go to a store, a Nike store, and then instead of having an Adidas shirt, he's having a Nike shirt. So there would be problems. So I think there are interesting features to do with this. But firstly, I think let's start in a digital environment because there it's easy to do.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So, Franky, from your perspective, the hyper utility or even like collabs, right? Any thoughts on that?
I think it's where my thought goes is IP protection, right? Like, I think when we start to get to a phase where we're seeing more big brands that have protected IP, like interoperability there, things get a little bit weird. And I think it's because there's an education piece, right? Like there's a reason why all Nintendo assets live inside Nintendo's ecosystem. And what, you know, I think where you have blockchains like Flow and you have, you know, other projects bringing in these external IPs, like, will there ever be a blockchain crossover? I don't know. I would almost say no. I think though there needs to be an education piece where these big brands that have, you know, this IP that might be 100 years old or, you know, 30 years old or whatever, that they're not going to miss out on royalties if that product leaves the platform, right? Like if that product or if that object stays, you know, if it moves and it sells on another place, like those royalties will still come back. And that's why you have things like, you know, that's why, like, you know, Mickey Mouse only stays inside Disneyland. You know, it's like, you know, the deal to have him have backpacks at Target, like that's a license deal. They're paying that, you know. But if you go and produce that item in China or Mexico or somewhere, you know, on the streets of Santee Alley in LA, like they're not getting a royalty cut. That's IP infringement. So I think there's still that. That's where I go when it comes to how these things interchange. And I think there is the battle between blockchains, which we'll see shortly. I think that's the more interesting part.
All right. So, so last question, you know, curious to know from each of you, what does the world full of NFTs look like to you? And so, Alex, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So what I've been thinking recently is just look at DeFi. What we have is that similar ERC20 tokens, they are added with composability and programmability, and now you can do crazy things with that. You can rent out on compounds, you can supply it to Uniswap, you can receive rewards for it, and you can put that reward in a rebalancing set. I expect something like that to happen with NFTs, so that NFT is just the programmable and composable rights to something. Take a look at the POAP protocol that gives people NFTs for participating in events, and then the same thing is used for protecting from Sybil attacks. So basically, like whoever participated in a lot of offline events is definitely a person on chain. You can rely on that information. There is a bankers community that relies on that information, and then there is a BZX community that made an airdrop of their governance token to the holders of this NFT, particular of the bankers community. I expect it like that, and if it's all on chain, But I do personally want to have NFTs off-chain, like I mean offline in the real world, for example, like as a tickets, like in the transport, to use them offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Johnvan, any thoughts on what the world, or what are your thoughts on a world full of NFTs?
My company is called Tokenization Limited since a long time, so I think you will know where I'm going. So for me, like, I'm seeing a world like which is a little bit like crazy, most likely. But think about it from the start of your birth certificate until like your marriage certificate, everything can be an NFT. Or even like your, like I had recently this case, and like I did my BA degree in London, and when I moved to Hong Kong a ton of years ago and did my master degree, you had to physically send over official transcript from the university in London to the university in Hong Kong. Why I cannot simply have an NFT which is representing that I have that degree, or something like in how to explain that? People like CVs. How many fake CVs are there where people claim they have worked for a company? Just imagine each time you worked for a company, you get issued an NFT that you really worked there. It can be even your passport can have an NFT. Everything like an NFT basically for me is something like a wrapper. It's a box I can put something in, which has value. And I think Alex mentioned it very well as well. For me, it's interesting, like you can fractionalize it, you can collateralize it, you can rent it, you can basically do all the things with it. And I would like to see a world where basically the concept of an NFT is basically applied to nearly everything which is there. Like
I like it.
Sorry, yeah, that's tokenizing the world, exactly.
So Marguerite, how about for you?
So I guess I think, I don't, like, for example, with gaming, I don't think that NFTs will ever like disrupt or take over traditional gaming. Gaming is just on a tear on its own. What I do think it does, though, is I think it really enables these luxury good markets to introduce new speculation into them that they never had before. The collectability, the nature, bridging basically the collectible markets with the digital assets is in and of itself huge. So like just bringing that value and the DeFi and the compound interest and the renting, it's actually all happening so fast that on our side, like as developers, we're working as fast as we can to keep up and to try to utilize the things that are working. So like, for example, the sharding of an NFT. How can people want it? Obviously, there's a massive demand for it. So how can we move as quickly as possible to give them something to do with it? The utility. So yeah, I guess like in the luxury goods space, in the collectability space, that's where I think this is really going to be a thing that grows.
So like provenance.
Yeah.
So Franky, how about you? What does the world look like full of NFTs?
I mean, everybody's touched on really good points. I think that slowly it becomes a little bit more quiet, right? It's the underlying technology and the underlying thing that like no one really talks about, right? Like, I don't know if there's JPEG or PNG enthusiasts. I know there's GIF enthusiasts, but like, I think it's important to understand like mainstream adoption, right? Like, we're trying to educate people that are used to getting emojis for free. They're used to downloading images on the internet for free. You can right click and save, right? Like that's been the habit that was kind of taught to technology users over the past 20, 30 years. So I think that it slowly becomes the background underlying process. We move from having plastic driver's licenses to they're on our phone. And they're protected and they're secure in that way. And it's the thing that no one's really talking about. That's like, securing and making it unique and real and secure. So I think it slowly gets quiet. But I think there are always going to be, core, hardcore, in the same way that there's like hardcore ASCII artists and ANSI artists. Like that's like an underground billboard design community that, back in the 80s and 90s was like, they were running those bulletin board websites. Like they were making amazing art, and that shit's still super, super dope. It's not even using images. It's just text edit. Mm-hmm. So, there's still cult communities behind that. So I think there will always be a cult community, but I see it slowly becoming just like, it's the background technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that fundamentally there's a lot of models that are kind of lopsided where NFTs can come in because we can engineer them very specifically and the incentive structures around them, that there's the potential to correct some of the models. And I think some of the breakdowns that we're seeing within systems on a global level really are opportunities for reconfiguration, for innovation, and for rearticulation, new ways forward. It's kind of like that dynamic squiggling sense of adaptability and being able to translate that into technology. So thank you, everyone. Great conversation around NFTs, and look forward to talking about it some more. And thank everybody for watching. Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for having.